You ever hear a story that is just so wild, so out there you think, no way, that has to be made up? Well, today we're going to dive into 3 true stories that prove reality can be way, way stranger and honestly, more shocking than anything you could ever invent. It's an old saying for a reason. We're about to look at 3 completely separate, totally real events that show you just how true it is. So, let's get into it.
Okay, for our first story, we're heading to a small rural village in central India, and it all centers around this 35-year-old man, Anand Yadav, who, by all accounts, was the picture of health. But one night, his life just took this sudden, totally inexplicable turn.
So on one side, you have Anand's life. He's young, he's healthy, he's happily married, and he has this one really deep desire to have a child with his wife, Priya. And then on the other side, you have this sudden tragic ending. He just collapses, gets rushed to the hospital, and is pronounced dead. And it leaves everyone, especially the doctors, completely baffled.
Yeah, that was the million-dollar question. I mean, there were no signs of injury, no history of sickness, nothing. The only way they were going to get an answer was to do an autopsy. The medical staff, they really had to look inside to solve this thing.
So the pathologist gets to work, but it's just a dead end at every single turn. His heart, totally normal. His lungs, clear. Every single one of his organs looked perfectly healthy. From a medical standpoint, there was absolutely no reason for him to be dead. So, frustrated and pretty much out of options, the pathologist makes one last kind of exploratory incision in Anand's throat.
And what they found there? Well, it yanks this story completely away from the world of medicine and deep into the world of belief. See, Anand was so desperate to have a child that he had secretly gone for help, not to a doctor, but to a tantric, a practitioner of occult magic. What the pathologist found was a baby chick lodged right in Anand's airway. The tantric's so-called cure for his infertility was for Anand to swallow a live chick, whole. He did what he was told, but the chick got stuck and he suffocated. It was a desperate act, born from this incredibly deep desire that led to a truly unbelievable death.
All right, let's move on to our second case. This one takes us to South Africa, back in 1979. We meet a guy named John Perrin, a 64-year-old man who lived in pretty much total isolation. But one morning, he gets this weird intuition, this unexplainable gut feeling that tells him to just leave his house and go for a walk.
So John follows the strange urge, and it leads him to a park right along a high coastal cliff. And when he gets there, he sees a young man, clearly distressed, pacing right at the very edge of this fatal drop. It was obvious to John, and to the small crowd that was starting to gather, that this man was about to end his own life. As John stood there watching, something just clicked. He suddenly understood. That strange intuition, the reason he was pulled from his house, it was all for this exact moment. He breaks away from the silent crowd, walks right up to the young man, puts his arm around him, and says those 5 chilling words. And then John just did it. The 64-year-old recluse simply walked to the edge and jumped. The young man was so horrified by what he just witnessed, the very act he was about to commit himself, that in that split second, he knew he wanted to live. An inexplicable sacrifice, prompted by a feeling no one could possibly explain, ended up saving a life. Okay, for our final story, we're going to travel back in time to World War II. It's 1 in the morning on March 3, 1944, and we're on a freight train climbing a steep mountain in southern Italy. The conditions are terrible, and one of the brakemen has this growing sense of dread. You had this perfect storm of problems all converging at once. First, the weather was awful, making the tracks dangerously slick. Second, because of wartime shortages, the train was running on this cheap, really low-quality coal. And finally, the train was way overweight. It was carrying over 500 stowaways who were fleeing the war, something the crew knew but kind of ignored out of sympathy. So the brakeman, Michel Paulo, he's watching as the train just struggles up this mountain. He's hoping this long tunnel up ahead will give them the dry tracks they need to get some momentum. The train enters the tunnel, but then it slows down and just grinds to a complete stop. Michel waits in the caboose just outside the tunnel entrance, waiting for a signal, a whistle, anything from the conductor. But all he heard was silence. Acting on instinct, Michel leaves his post to go investigate, walking into the pitch-black tunnel.
As he's moving past the silent train cars full of all these sleeping stowaways, he starts to hear this bizarre sound coming from outside the train, a loud, rhythmic thumping noise against the rocky tunnel floor. The cause was horrifyingly simple. When the train stalled, the engineers tried to force a restart. They started shoveling massive amounts of that low-quality coal into the engine. But inside that enclosed tunnel, the result was catastrophic. The air filled almost instantly with a huge, invisible cloud of carbon monoxide.
That number, that's the death toll. Nearly everyone on board, the crew and all 500 stowaways, died within minutes. And that strange thumping sound Michelle heard, it was the sound of bodies, people who had died in their sleep, simply rolling off the train and hitting the tunnel floor. A perfect storm of little circumstances had just created one of history's deadliest and least known rail disasters.
So you have a fatal ritual, a shocking sacrifice, and a silent disaster. These three stories seem completely unrelated, right? But when you really look closer, some pretty powerful common threads start to pop up.
It all really comes down to this one question. You see, each story was driven by some powerful, unseen force, whether it was an internal desire, an external circumstance, or a feeling that just defied all logic. Let's break down how.
And Anne's story is a really tragic look at how desperation can just short-circuit rational thought, making someone vulnerable to extreme ideas. John's story is this profound mystery of human intuition, where an inexplicable urge led to this ultimate act of empathy. And the train disaster? That's a chilling example of how seemingly small, unrelated problems, bad weather, bad coal, extra weight, can just line up perfectly to create a single catastrophic failure.
You know, what's most unsettling is that each of these stories started in a completely normal way. A man wanting a family, a guy going for a walk, a routine train journey. It really makes you wonder, what other unbelievable truths are playing out right now, hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life?